Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Melanie Zanona in Washington, and we begin with breaking news as Capitol Hill is rocked by new and disturbing allegations of assault and rape against embattled former Congressman Eric Swalwell, as both parties are dealing with misconduct investigations by their members. Swalwell's resignation from Congress was made official just moments ago on the House floor. Swalwell announced his resignation last night, which was followed less than an hour later by Republican Congressman Tony Gonzales, announcing his retirement amid fallout from an affair he had with an aide who later died by suicide. Both men calling it quits as they were facing investigation by the House Ethics Committee. Swalwell's resignation coming after allegations surfaced from multiple women, including a former staffer, of sexual misconduct, ranging from inappropriate text messages to rape. Today, another woman came forward, accusing Swalwell of drugging, raping, and choking her in 2018.
I believe he drugged my drink. I only had one glass of wine. We were supposed to go to a political event, and he said he needed to get paperwork from his hotel room. When I arrived at his hotel room, I was already incapacitated and I couldn't move my arms or my body. He raped me and he choked me. And while he was choking me, I lost consciousness. And I thought I died.
Swalwell's attorney just releasing a statement saying, in part, Congressman Eric Swalwell categorically and unequivocally denies each and every allegation of sexual misconduct and assault that has been leveled against him. These accusations are false, fabricated, and deeply offensive. A calculated and transparent political hit job designed to destroy the reputation of a man who has spent 20 years in public service. We should note that Swalwell did apologize for what he called mistakes in judgment in his resignation announcement. House Speaker Mike Johnson and Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries today both responding to Swalwell's decision to leave office.
Can we get your reaction to the decision by Gonzales and Swalwell to resign? Do you believe they made the right decision?
I do. I mean, my views have been made known about the terrible allegations that were made, and obviously the facts that they both admitted to, and I think it was the appropriate thing.
Did you push Swalwell to resign?
Member conversations that I've had will remain private.
Why did you call for him publicly to resign given these allegations?
Thank you. He's made the right decision.
The allegations against Swalwell, who was a 2020 presidential candidate, a Trump impeachment manager, and until this weekend, a top candidate for governor in California, have rattled others on Capitol Hill. That includes Senator Ruben Gallego, who was close friends with Swalwell and chaired his 2020 presidential campaign. Gallego today responding to questions about what he knew and when.
Eric Swalwell lied to all of us. He lied to the most powerful people in this country. And they trusted him. They trusted him with some of those sensitive spots in our government, whether it was on Judiciary Committee, Intel Committee, impeaching Donald Trump. And that clouded my judgment, my friendship with him. Our family's friendship together with him clouded my judgment. And I was wrong. I deeply, deeply regret that. I also had no knowledge of predatory behavior, sexual assault, or harassment.
NBC News Chief Capitol Hill correspondent Ryan Nobles joins me now, along with NBC's Camila Bernal in Los Angeles and NBC News legal analyst Misty Marris. Ryan, I do want to start with you over on Capitol Hill. It's just been quite a stunning a few days over on Capitol Hill. Let's start with Eric Swalwell, though, and his resignation. What specifically led to his decision to step down? Walk us through all of that.
It just became just a mountain of accusations against him and an unbelievable pressure campaign that just seemed to be too much for Swalwell to handle. And there was a very concerted effort here, one that I think was real, to pair the beginning of an ethics investigation with a potential expulsion resolution. Now, there was always the chance that that expulsion resolution may have been tabled pending the results of that ethics investigation. But it seemed as though, especially given the fact that there was also a Republican expulsion mention, a potential expulsion resolution connected to a Republican, Attorney Gonzales, that you could pair with it, that there might have been enough support for that expulsion measure just to go through. And it became clear that Swalwell just did not want to deal with that anymore. So instead of going through that whole process, especially given the fact that he was not coming back to his congressional seat under any circumstance at the end of this term, Swalwell just decided to end everything today, effectively ending that congressional ethics investigation, but certainly not ending the legal trouble he is now facing.
Yeah, no doubt. Ryan, the allegations against him seem to be impacting some of his fellow Democrats, specifically those who have been close to him. What can you tell us?
You know, Melanie, up until about the middle of last week, there were many Democrats that were still rushing to the defense of Eric Swalwell. You'll remember that there was a social media influencer campaign that for weeks, maybe even months, had been floating the idea of these rumors connected to Swalwell and his misconduct. But they had yet to reveal any specific information. During that period of time, many of his fellow Democrats rushed to his defense, including Arizona Senator Ruben Gallego. Well, today, Gallego, actually, after calling for him to be expelled right before Swalwell resigned, said over and over again in a very tense 40-minute press conference that he had been lied to by Eric Swalwell, and even admitted that Swalwell's misdeeds, because of their close connection, could impact his political future. Listen to this back and forth with our Julie Sirkin.
Congressman, you have future political ambitions. How can people trust you to run for higher office if you didn't know that your best friend was engaging in even inappropriate behavior?
Look, I messed up. I'm human. I trusted this man. I trusted him to watch my children. I would watch his children. He knew that I had just gone through the most bruising campaign where I was accused of being a mule for the cartel, where my kids were subjected to TV commercials about what an awful human being I was. And he knew how to prey on that. And I was a loyal friend to someone that just was not loyal to me.
Of course, Gallego has flirted with the idea of even running for president in 2028. He's visited some of the early states. He doesn't bat down the speculation surrounding it. But there is a growing campaign of people asking questions about Gallego's association with Swalwell. He made it clear today he knew nothing of his alleged misconduct and was completely taken aback when he learned the details from some of these accusers. Melanie.
Yeah, I assume those questions not going away anytime soon. Camila, I want to bring you into this conversation. You're in California right now. That's where the latest woman came forward today with some accusations. Walk us through all of that.
Yeah, so the accusations were obviously very disturbing and very graphic to hear. The accuser today saying it essentially was a relationship that she thought was a friendship. They had met through social circles because she had a business. She was a model here in Los Angeles, and she thought she could get some help from Eric Swalwell. And essentially what happened was that after 2 social encounters, she says there was a third encounter, and it was in that third encounter where she believes she was drugged and choked, and she said she essentially felt like she died. And what's important here is that they want a criminal investigation in all of this. The attorneys today saying, look, when you lose your job in Congress, that's not accountability. So they want to see this criminal investigation because they believe that that's how they will get justice in this case. And the accuser admitting that, yes, it took a long time for her to come forward because this happened in 2018, but saying that she does have evidence, that she has the text messages, she has that photo with him, she told other people, she also saw a therapist. So they believe they have a substantial case against Eric Swalwell. And so we'll see what happens moving forward, but they already went to the LA County Sheriff's Department to try to get that ball rolling, essentially, in terms of the investigation, and we'll see how this all develops. But specifically, they want that criminal investigation. Mel.
And Camila, I need to ask, what is the timeline on that investigation? Do we know what that could potentially look like?
We don't, because first there has to be a report that's made by the LA Sheriff's Department, and then it's something where the DA will decide if this is something they want to charge and prosecute in the future. So we don't have an exact timeline, and the attorney said if none of this works out, then we might consider civil action as well, but they are primarily focused on the criminal part of all of this first, and then they'll see how this all develops. Because I did ask, you know, what is the goal, or what do you want? And they're not exactly sure what that looks like, other than the fact that they want authorities to investigate this and see this as something criminal.
And Ryan, I have to get to this other resignation that just happened today. Tony Gonzales, he was a Republican from Texas. What kind of pressure was he facing to step down?
Well, there's no doubt that the Swalwell allegations put an even brighter spotlight on Tony Gonzales. He was already facing an enormous amount of pressure to leave Congress. Initially, his plan was to stay through the balance of his term. But then once the drumbeat of expulsion surrounding Swalwell started to pick up, it was almost immediately connected to Gonzales as well. And there was obviously kind of a political exit ramp here for those who didn't want to affect the margins in the House of Representatives between Republicans and Democrats, and the opportunity to vote yes on expulsion for both a Republican and a Democrat and not impact the margins seemed enticing, which was one of the reasons that you thought maybe this is something that could happen even before the ethics investigation went forward. Just like Swalwell, Gonzales did not appear to want any part of the potential of being expelled from Congress before his term was up. So he just decided to call it quits on his career as well. His career is effectively over at 11:59 tonight.
Yeah, just a remarkable turn of events over the last 24 hours. Ryan on Capitol Hill, Camila in California, thank you both so much. I do want to get some legal perspective now with our Misty Marris. Misty, let's start with the new allegations against Swalwell in California. What is the statute of limitations here, and what potential charges could he face?
So these allegations are from 2018, so the statute of limitations is still in play on the criminal side and the civil side. When it comes to criminal conduct for a forcible rape, which would be the highest level charges and would fit the bill if the accuser, what she said today in that press conference, were to be proved in court, there is no statute of limitations, Mel. That has been extinguished by the state of California. Massive changes to the law in 2017, so just a year before she said the allegations took place. For lesser sexual assault type offenses that could potentially be at issue, the statute of limitations is 10 years. So still falling within that time frame to potentially investigate and ultimately charge on the criminal side.
And Misty, the accuser here, her name is Lana Drews. She said she did not file a police report in 2018 when the alleged rape took place, but she did tell people close to her and says she recorded these events in her calendar. So from a legal perspective, talk to me about how important that potential corroborating evidence could be to the case.
Anytime you have a case where you have a time that's lapsed significantly, there's going to be a lot of evidence that no longer exists, like medical treatment or video recordings. So that is something that oftentimes comes down to, in these cases, a he said, she said. So corroborating evidence is key. And what she pointed to in that press conference was a handwritten calendar that she told friends around and family members around that time about these allegations, and also therapy notes relating to treatment that she sought. Now, all of that would be at play and something investigators would look at. The closer in time to the actual alleged conduct, the more weight it would be given. But all of that is imperative, because prosecutors don't do a he said, she said, who's more credible. What prosecutors need to analyze is whether there's enough evidence to prove a case beyond a reasonable doubt. So anything to corroborate one side or the other is going to be imperative to that analysis.
And Misty, her attorney says they are willing to cooperate with the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, who is also launching its own investigation into an alleged assault by Swalwell from another woman. What do you make of that?
Well, we're looking at allegations that are very similar. And whenever you have that, there's going to be an analysis by investigators, and also ultimately, if there are criminal charges, about patterns of conduct. We've seen this in other cases. So there could be sharing of information about what is received in the course of these investigations. And all of that could be at issue in both parallel investigations in New York and California. So you're talking about investigations going on the criminal side in two different states, and then other allegations which relate to these unsolicited pictures and videos through Snapchat. That's a different story, but could still be relevant to the analysis in both jurisdictions as far as that pattern of conduct.
Misty, thank you so much. With me now is Congresswoman Debbie Dingell, a Democrat from Michigan. Congresswoman, thank you so much for joining us. I do want to start with these disturbing allegations against now former Congressman Eric Swalwell. I just want to get your reaction to his decision and more generally to this moment in Congress, because it really does feel like a reckoning on Capitol Hill.
Well, it is a reckoning, and what my reaction is my reaction every time I hear allegations and actually see videos of sexual attacks and staffers placed in these kinds of positions. It's horrific. It shouldn't happen. We shouldn't tolerate it, and we have to make it safe for people to come forward and report what happened. And I think that even the time at least the time it took for some of this becomes public shows you that the Me Too moment wasn't as freeing as everybody felt, and that there are consequences when you tell people what happened to you. And unfortunately, that's still reality. I'm glad that he had enough sense to resign, so we didn't have to put the House through this, and that Tony Gonzales should have resigned when he admitted to having an affair with the staffer who committed suicide by lighting herself on fire. Republicans should have done what Democrats do, show the colleague, the member, that they will not tolerate this behavior. But is a day of reckoning? I don't know. I've been living through a lot of things. I'm not old, but I'm seasoned. I have many of my own stories where you would never have dared come forward, and even when I asked for help, was told deal with it or leave. We're not there anymore. You don't have to do that, but we still have not gone as far as we want, and bad behavior will still continue.
Swalwell's attorney says that the woman's allegations are fabricated and part of a, quote, calculated and transparent political hit job. What is your reaction to that suggestion that these women are lying?
So I think the previous, the lawyer, the legal analyst that just preceded me talked about patterns. It does sound like many of the women are reporting similar things that happened. I do believe in due process, so that matters. But the congressman himself is admitting to mistakes that he made. People need to understand that when you are in an institution like this, you live in a fishbowl, and that you have to live up to a higher standard. And somehow he put himself in a place to be that people have made these allegations. Now, I want to be clear. I never heard anything, or I would have gone and confronted him when I did it. But I'm now hearing from probably more men than women that there were rumors out there for a while. So, you know, people are entitled to due process, but I also think nobody has to put up with it, and women are too scared to come forward.
I know you say you haven't heard the rumors, but do you believe that the Democratic leadership had zero idea about any of this, given that you said there have been rumors circulating for quite a while about him?
But, you know, you would really be surprised at how everybody thinks that we all hear everything. But if you're somebody, I don't go out at night. I don't, since my husband died, I'm never dating again. I don't want to have any. So I work. I go to events and I work. I think that there are a group of people that do talk to each other at night, try to help relax, have social lives. But I do believe leadership hadn't heard about it, because I know them, and I think if they had, they would have confronted it. And the one person I know, if she had heard it, would have decimated him, and that's Nancy Pelosi.
I do want to turn to the ongoing shutdown of the Department of Homeland Security. Congressional Republicans are working to fund the department without Democratic votes. Do you think Democrats need to reconsider some concessions in order to not leave the shutdown empty-handed?
Look, I'm going to tell you this point blank. We need guardrails for ICE, and it is inexcusable that the Republicans are still playing games and that TSA is not being funded. Proposals have been put out there. The Senate has voted on them that would fund the TSA, the Coast Guard, FEMA, which need to be done. And Republicans are trying to put the blame on us. I think the American people think ICE needs guardrails. And when I went through TSA this morning to come back here, they all talked to me. They are hurting. They are scared. Yes, they got partial payments. They're owed back pay. One of the this TSA agent said to me today, I can't afford my school loans. I mean, we're organizing food banks. This is inexcusable. We shouldn't have been out. We should have been here for the last 2 weeks, and we need to figure out how we're going to get people that keep us safe paid, period. And that's their responsibility as well as ours, but we also need guardrails on ICE.
You know, Republicans are talking about funding ICE and CBP and the broader agency now for 3 years through reconciliation. That would mean no Democratic input for the rest of this Trump administration. Could that not be a worse outcome than if Democrats had come to the table on a compromise?
Well, one, do you and I know that that reconciliation wish is even going to happen? And two, if we win the House and Senate back, we are going to fight very hard to ensure that we aren't making the TSA and others a ping pong ball in all of this, but to go back and undo damage that we are seeing, starting with the big bad bill.
Recently, NBC News did speak to some voters in Michigan about how they feel about the Democratic Party, their assessment of the party heading into the midterms. I want you to take a listen to some of what they said.
I'd like to know, what are the key characteristics or traits that best describe today's Democratic Party?
Subdued.
All right, Paul?
Disjointed.
Cindy?
Lacking.
All right, Lucy?
Spineless.
I think the word that best describes them right now is bruised.
Those are some tough words. Congresswoman, what do you make of that assessment? And what do you think Democrats need to do in order to regain the confidence of the base?
Look, I'm at times get called Debbie Downer in meetings because I tell people the truth, because I'm out there listening to those voters that were in your focus group, and they're not afraid to tell me the same thing. We as Democrats have got to show people that we can deliver for them. They are worried about how much their groceries cost, what their gasoline prices are. They want to see us fight for them, and they want to see us deliver. We have to develop our plan of what we're going to deliver for them right away when we regain the House and then deliver on it. And we're also going to, besides addressing affordability, we have to help fix the broken health care system, and we've got to address the corruption that we are watching in government right now.
Congresswoman Debbie Dingell, thank you so much.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.